Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to slow down and take a really deep, contemplative look at something we often just accept as the ultimate goal in life, the suburban dream. Or, the house dream. We're unpacking a fascinating, yet honestly kind of unsettling sociological paradox. It's this idea that in our relentless pursuit of massive private spaces, chasing the biggest yard, the highest fence, the maximum physical square footage, we are, ironically, making our actual, day-to-day lives feel incredibly small. Let's just pause and really think about how our modern neighborhoods are physically constructed. We have to ask ourselves if this endless drive for isolated luxury is accidentally building us a gold-plated cage. Sure, it's a cage that might look absolutely beautiful from the driveway, complete with a manicured lawn, but it's a cage that physically segregates us, and our nuclear families, from the broader, vibrant, messy social fabric of a real living community. And that brings us to a really heavy systemic question. Does maximizing our private space structurally destroy our public life? I want you to really focus on that word for a second, structurally. We aren't just talking about individual choices here. We're not talking about just wanting to stay indoors on a rainy Tuesday or needing a little quiet time after a long shift. We're talking about the concrete and the asphalt. We have to wonder if the very physical act of building these highly privatized, isolated fortresses is the exact mechanism that's starving out our spontaneous social encounters. When we meticulously design every single inch of our built environment to maximize personal privacy and keep the outside world at bay, what exactly are we designing out of our lives? Are we literally erasing the casual, local, spontaneous overlap that makes a civic community actually function? So let's start unpacking this with Section 1, the suburban design paradox. Okay, this is a deeply counterintuitive realization that has been studied in urban sociology for decades. Planned suburban communities are so often built around this highly artificial, top-down ideal of togetherness. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The mandatory shared interior lawns, the perfectly scheduled community center events, the highly structured group activities. But as this brilliant quote points out, when a spatial layout dictates that you literally must share a massive, highly involved amount of your private life just to have any baseline neighborly contact at all, it actually drives people completely apart. Because the environment lacks a natural, organic, low-stakes public sidewalk life, residents are forced into a really weird, uncomfortable position. You basically have to either share everything or share absolutely nothing. There's no middle ground. And human nature kicks in here. When faced with this kind of forced intimacy that threatens our inner privacy, our basic survival instinct is to protect our dignity. So what do? We withdraw. We retreat behind the garage door and we choose to share nothing at all. Moving on to Section 2, the architecture of isolation. Now, here is a truly mind-opening historical contrast. If you look way back at the aristocratic mansions and palaces of the past, the concept of privacy as you and I understand it today, well, it simply didn't exist. The luxury of a historical palace was entirely organic. Family members, dependents, staff, visitors, they all naturally mingled in large, common, free-flowing areas. There was no strict, obsessive physical separation of individuals. But modern privatization completely flipped the script. It's almost like we all decided to start building tiny, highly defensive medieval fortresses for ourselves. We started carving up our domestic spaces, drawing these incredibly strict, invisible boundaries that dictate exactly where certain people belong and where certain functions are allowed to happen. We built hard, unforgiving boundaries. Sociologists call them spatial fracture lines, not just inside our homes with specialized rooms, but incredibly hard physical lines between our homes and the outside world. Which brings us to the outside world in Section 3, a car-dependent society. When you scale a neighborhood down to the automobile rather than the pedestrian walker, the reality is pretty grim. If you look at the flow of movement in an area defined by long, monotonous, sweeping street blocks, you start to see how the geometry automatically sorts people into highly isolated, parallel paths. The physical pavement itself literally blocks different uses and different types of people from ever intersecting. Notice how geographically close residents in a subdivision might actually be to one another, maybe just a few hundred feet. Yet structurally, they are kept entirely apart. They are sorted into parallel trajectories that meet far, far too infrequently. The sheer physical friction of these long blocks, combined with deep, private setbacks and massive front lawns, means that casual, local community overlap isn't just unlikely, the architecture itself makes it structurally impossible. The concrete actively thwarts people from mixing. And this creates a devastatingly effective, vicious circle. Let's walk through it step by step, because this is absolutely crucial to understand. First, you have a very thin population spread out over vast, privatized acreages. Because of that extreme, sprawling spread, step 2 is forced car dependency. You literally cannot walk to fulfill your basic daily needs. It's too far and it's too dangerous. Step 3. Because absolutely everyone is forced into driving metal boxes, pedestrian life completely evaporates. The sidewalks become ghost towns. And step 4 is the most insidious part of the whole cycle, the catastrophic loss of natural safety. Without people walking, mingling, and existing in the space, there are no natural eyes on the street to just casually look out for the neighborhood. Spreading homes out mandates vehicle use, which murders foot traffic and ultimately destroys that continuous, low-level human watchfulness that is absolutely required to keep an area organically safe. Let's look deeper at what we lose in Section 4, starving the public sphere. Think about the real visceral heart of this loss, and try to picture your own neighborhood right now. Drinking a soda on the front stoop of a densely populated, lively city street is a fundamentally entirely different human experience than drinking a soda in a private, finished basement game room. The stoop is what we call a low-stakes public arena. It's where you get casual, unscheduled advice from a neighbor walking their dog. It's where you keep a passive, protective eye on the kids playing across the street. And it's where you build a vital baseline of civic trust, without ever having to formally invite a single person into your inner private sanctuary. A formal, private game room, I don't care how luxurious or big it is, simply cannot replicate that social function. By pulling all of our recreation, all of our relaxation, and all of our existence deep inside our massive private walls, we accidentally starve our public streets of the very human presence that makes a culture vibrant, dynamic, and alive. And finally, Section 5, the cost of extreme privacy. When sociologists map out the stark realities of this geographic structure, the differences in how various people actually experience life are just profound. A highly mobile, high-income commuter can easily use the massive highway system to escape local neighborhood stagnation. They breeze right through it. But I want you to imagine a stay-at-home parent, or perhaps an elderly resident. If their spatial reality is forced car dependency, situated in a sprawling desert of houses with absolutely no dense, diverse public life around them, they are trapped. They have to get into a 2-ton vehicle and drive miles just to buy a loaf of bread, or to simply exist alongside other human beings in society. They become profoundly, structurally isolated. And similarly, structurally poor demographics often find themselves trapped in fixed housing zones, entirely cut off from the outward sprawling expansion of new jobs. So the massive expansion of the internal private sphere for a select few directly results in isolating, starving, and trapping others. The ultimate systemic cost of this extreme spatial privatization is, quite honestly, pure isolation and social havoc. When we lack a natural, overlapping sidewalk life, the ordinary, low-level public jobs of a community, like just looking out for one another or banding together for common civic purposes, they go completely undone. People start to withdraw into highly suspicious, hyperprotective islands. And it leads to this really dark phenomenon known as turf psychology. Turf psychology is that creeping, underlying feeling that your small, isolated plot of land is a fragile, embattled kingdom that must be aggressively defended against any and all outsiders. Eventually, the outside world completely ceases to be viewed as a shared, collaborative community, and instead, it just feels like a constant, looming threat to your private sanctuary. So, I want to leave you with this final, highly provocative thought to carry with you. As we continue to endlessly chase the massive physical square footage of the so-called house dream, and as we retreat further and further into our deeply private, climate-controlled game rooms and fenced-in backyards, we really have to stop and ask ourselves, are we truly building comfortable homes? Or are we accidentally, systematically designing a world where we are completely structurally alone? The spatial design of our built environment really does dictate the social reality of our everyday lives. Think deeply about the physical spaces you inhabit today and what they might be silently asking you to give up. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I'll see you in the next one.